Good afternoon, good morning to some of you, good late afternoon to some of you as well. My name is John Carroll. I'm the CEO and founder of the Service Council, and welcome to today's inService podcast presentation. This segment built around the topic of vision to implementation, how to win with AI. We are so incredibly pleased to be joined by today's guest, our featured guest, Scott Chrismer. He is the Senior Vice President of Field Service and EAM Center of Excellence for IFS. A very warm welcome to you, Scott. Welcome to today's podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited, John.
Outstanding. I'm also joined by my colleague, Gerardo Pelayo. Gerardo is our Vice President of Research and Advisory. He'll be moderating our discussion, and we'll get things kicked off momentarily. I just want to remind our listening audience, whether it's just listening to audio or participating with us here on LinkedIn Live, hello, we see you. And we hope that you engage with us today. So we try to make these interactive and responsive. If you have questions, reactions, Scott has agreed to create an Ask Me Anything type format here, an AMA, in terms of the questions that you submit through the LinkedIn platform. So we'll do our best to respond to those as they come in. If you are listening to today's podcast and you find value in it and you'd like to share it with your colleagues after the fact, we encourage you to do so. You can access this on any podcast platform you get your podcast from, our website, on LinkedIn, etc. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into today's discussion. Scott, I know you well, Gerardo does as well, but for our listening audience, could you introduce yourself, a little bit of your background?
Yeah, sure, John. So good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Scott Chrismer, Senior Vice President of Field Service and EAM Center of Excellence at IFS. I've been here coming up on 4 years. Spent most of my career in some of the big companies with Salesforce, Click Software, and Oracle prior to that. I lived down in Charleston, South Carolina with my wife. Just celebrated our 28th wedding anniversary on Saturday. Our two teenage boys that are, well, actually not teenage, they're junior and senior in college, and our two dogs. Been in the technology space my entire career, so over 30 years in working with large enterprise organizations, trying to drive value into their organization.
That's outstanding, Scott. And listen, for our audience, IFS has become a recognized brand for many of our audience. But for some of our audience, could you introduce IFS? Maybe talk a little bit more about the footprint of IFS. I was talking with Scott as we were planning. Oliver and the marketing leadership team over there did a big brand campaign. I saw IFS purple everywhere I went, for crying out loud. But for our listening audience, if you could introduce IFS, that'd be wonderful.
Absolutely. And it's funny you say that. So IFS is probably one of the largest technology companies a lot of people hadn't heard of, within the exception of the last couple of years. 40-year-old Swedish company, founded in Sweden 40 years ago. Really strong in EMEA. North America has been a strong customer base for us, but growth for us in the last 4 or 5 years. We're coming up on about $1.4 billion of annual revenue. We have a unified platform that offers Kubernetes-based capabilities around ERP, enterprise asset management, field service management, and enterprise service management. So we're not trying to be everything to everybody, but we're really good at what we do. From the field service perspective, I'm extremely proud of the fact that, for those that are familiar with the Gartner Magic Quadrant, we were the only company that was in the top right of the Gartner Magic Quadrant for the last 7 years and the final year that they were going to do it. And our CEO just announced this morning the new Gartner Voice of Customer that's coming out. We are the only vendor that's sitting in the top right Magic Quadrant for that as well, from the Voice of Customer from a recommended service solution. So talking about the marketing stuff, yeah, that was pretty amazing, and is one of the best marketing campaigns I've ever seen executed. Specifically in North America, we're in I think 21 airports now, and I get feeds from customers all the time. It's like, funny you call. I just saw your stuff in the airport today. So instead of explaining who we are, now we can explain how we can help.
That's outstanding. And the voice of the customer, the most important voice, as you can appreciate. Can you talk a little bit about your customers? Maybe some examples of your customers briefly?
Yeah, sure. So unlike some of our competition in the space, we don't try to be everything to everybody. So we've got 5 verticals that we go after specifically. Manufacturing is our biggest, telecommunications, utilities, aerospace and defense, and then life sciences are our other vertical that we focus on. So we bring some serious expertise to the table that not only knows the technology, but the industry depth and breadth capabilities. And that's one of the reasons why our customers, seem to kind of rank us so high, because we don't come to try to be very generic. We bring very custom tailored solutions defined for their industry and their knowledge base. So it works out really well for us.
Outstanding. So today's topic of vision to implementation, how to win with AI, is such an important topic. We've been talking about AI and how do organizations move from consideration to scale with AI. So really interested to jump into today's discussion and really dig into your viewpoints on this topic. I'm going to hand things over to Gerardo, who will lead us through today's discussion. Thanks, Gerardo.
Perfect. Thank you, John. And Scott, thank you for joining us today. So the title of the session includes the winning with AI part of the sentence. And I'd like to take a couple of steps back and ask the question, well, what does winning mean to begin with? And the reason I start there is, across our latest research in field service, in supply chain, in remote support, the number one reason that service leaders have reported as driving the challenges in their operations is underutilization of data that they already have. Mm-hmm. That data takes different flavors, but it's always, I have the data, I'm not able to leverage it in a way that can drive my outcomes. Mm-hmm. So why is this such a challenge? Can you talk a little bit about what should organizations do with data, and what are they typically missing with this approach?
Yeah, so I think the whole concept of AI, obviously, it's been the big buzzword, and everybody's been talking about it for the past 2 to 3 years. And prior to that, it was all, everyone's was setting up data lakes and capturing all this immense amounts of data out there. It's interesting, and our solutions have had AI and machine learning built into them for about 9 years now. So we're long and pioneers in this space, leveraging that data, because it's incredibly important to be able to capture the data, but actually utilize the data. So, and that's the one thing we see with a lot of organizations. They've got all these data lakes out there. They've been capturing data forever. What do you actually do with it? How do you monetize it? How do you drive efficiency and cost out of your service chain? And that's something that's critically important. Taking that data that you've got today, one of the things I see a lot of companies try to do, they've got these big grandiose ideas. When you're talking at scale at the enterprise level, you don't need to eat the whale. It's small bites have monumental impact to the bottom line. If you can cut 1/10 of one job off a day across your whole ecosystem per technician, that adds up to millions of dollars over the year, and overtime and fuel consumption and wear and tear in your vehicles. It's just, they all stack on top of each other. And that's one of the things that, from our perspective, we think we kind of cracked the code on it. We do it real time. We do it better than anybody else from that aspect of it. But it's all those little incremental pieces of where you can plug AI into to get predictive about job durations, how long it's going to take your techs to actually complete the job based on their skill level, their maturity level. Do they have the parts on the vehicle? All those little things, they add up immensely over time to drive value, to take costs out of that service chain.
Yeah, that's I hear you. And one of the things you mentioned is this large organizations and the need to make a splash without trying to boil the ocean as you go around it, right? And as you were talking, I remembered a phrase from a good friend of mine. He used to say, well, 9 pregnant women cannot have a baby within a month. And and I recalled it because you said, well, you have to take this bite-sized approach, right? And build on those successes. Do you have some guardrails, some rules of thumb that you might share on what's a good sizing strategy? How to define the right size of a scope of a use case as we start thinking about AI without boiling the ocean?
Sure. And that's it's a little bit of a unique question for every customer. So every customer is a little bit different. I mean, they all have similar use cases, but they have different objectives based on kind of where they're at in their maturity level. Do they have a robust customer base? Do they have, contracts in place that they've got to support from an SLA perspective? Every customer is a little bit different. I mean, they're not total snowflakes in the fact of the base underlying service of what they're trying to deliver, but they're all in different maturity levels and different locations in their life cycle. So we talk to very large customers that have very rudimentary service models. We talk to smaller customers that have really complex and mature service models. It's a case by case basis. There isn't really a one size fits all from my perspective, and it also depends on kind of where they're at with their current customer experience. They had fires that have driven CSAT way down. Where are they at in that model?
Yeah, and as you talked about the size, one of the things is connecting it to the data as well is taking that data and translating it into actions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the challenges in doing this are probably, as many of us have experienced, not the same in small versus large organizations. So particularly for the larger type of implementations, can you share maybe some examples or nuggets again of what are the lessons learned to make the translation of data into actionable intelligence a more efficient process?
Yeah, for sure. So a big part of it is taking a look at what your KPIs that you're being measured on and what you're looking to perform or improve upon. Then the way we look at it and the way we work with our clients on, we tie dollar values to every one of those. Now, some of them are hard to tie dollar value to, maybe a CSAT issue, but higher CSAT overall lends to more profitable customer base and more additional customers, things like that. But the biggest thing that we tell our customers is let's figure out what your KPIs and which ones are important to you at this moment, realizing that 6 weeks from now they could be totally different. You've got a new CIO or a new CEO that has a totally different mandate. Figure out what the KPIs that are important for you. Stack rank them from a profitability perspective. If you're trying to drive profit, you're trying to reduce costs, figure out, again, aligning with the customer with what their objectives are. It's all outcomes based. So in service, the way we look at it, we have the ability to look at a ton of different metrics before we assign jobs. Is it profitability? Is it overtime? Is it CSAT? Is it miles? Is it fuels driven? Is it hitting an SLA or getting a penalty for an SLA? All those things have different weighting criteria and which ones are important to a customer. It's key for us to be tied to the executive line to understand what's important to the executives with how they're driving their business from a shareholder perspective, and then mapping to those things. And then when we come in from that, we got to have some support from the C-suite from a change management perspective, because that's one of the biggest challenges these customers have today is, they've got grandiose ideas of how they want to go to market, but you've got a 5,000 person field service organization out there that, all they care about is getting home at 5 o'clock so they can pick their kid up at school. They're going to have the tools and parts available in their truck when they show up for a job they were assigned to. Are they going to be able to hit their bonus because they were able to complete X amount of jobs per week, things like that. So aligning that with your field service, with the change management, with the executives, and making sure everybody's rowing in that same direction, getting some of those small wins early on so that it builds momentum so everyone gets a little bit excited about it. Then you can start, taking another bite of that whale.
Yeah, I'm so glad you called that out and that you're seeing that in the market, taking that approach. We hear it quite often. In fact, a shameless plug here, but the theme for our executive symposium coming up in a month and a half is a human connected digital journeys, and it's precisely because of that. We want the data, we want the technology, we want to know how to leverage all of these things. But at the end of the day, it has to translate into processes that people adopt and leverage. And unless we cover all of these bases, then we run the risk of ending up with very good ideas and very little results coming out of that. So I'm so glad that you brought that up.
Gerardo, if I could just make a couple points, just going back to some of the viewpoints that Scott's shared so far. I want to double click on this concept of there's a spectrum. You talked about, the notion that the degree of complexity within an organization, the degree of, spectrum that is present within an organization, there's multiple variables, right? You have the variable of the complexity of products. How extensive is that product portfolio? You have the spectrum of skill set in terms of the workforce. I think, one of the things that we're seeing commonly called out by service leaders is a core tenet of, taking data from along the journey of, from raw data to information to knowledge to wisdom or context, right? So how can we prepare that data? But when you start to put all these different complexities into it in terms of the spectrum, it starts to change things, and it starts to create a spectrum of need that you need to consider as part of your approach to AI and more broadly speaking, knowledge. And so I just wanted to double click on that because I think you make some really good points, yeah, I appreciate them. So those were really, really interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'm glad you called that out, John. And also following up on this, the KPIs is another thing that you started talking about, and where I would like to see a change in the next coming months. So the explanation behind that, we do our service leaders agenda survey. The service innovation and expansion of the service portfolio were number 1 and number 3 focus areas for 2024. And it seems very hard to accomplish that when the North Star that an organization might follow is to continue driving efficiency on the processes that are already in place. So getting better at the things that you're doing, that's great, don't get me wrong. But it's not necessarily service innovation. It's definitely not an expansion of the service portfolio. So with the possibilities that AI opens up, have you started to see in the industry some of this shift in the KPIs and the service models that organizations are able to deliver?
Yeah, for sure. So you're starting to see an early shift into, what we call the servitization model. We're selling, an outcomes-based subscription model. One of our customers is Rolls-Royce aircraft engines, and they were actually one of the pioneers in the space. They started, I think it was like almost 40 years ago, that they were no longer as an option. Obviously it was a dynamic change, but they weren't necessarily selling their aircraft engines anymore. They were selling what they called power by the hour. So the customers only really cared about uptime and being able to pay for it when they used it, and when they wanted to go use it, it was available and working and things like that. They've been a partner of ours for, I think it's about 9 years now, and the model that they've gone to market with, and over 50% of their contracts are now sold as a subscription model. So the customers don't really care that they're buying 50 engines. They want to be able to buy, 5,000 hours of flight time, and whenever they want it, it's available. They've inserted, IoT sensors, and we're looking at all that data real time and be able to get real predictive about potential breaks and things like that. So it gives you the ability to maintain your engines much more precisely, so that they're not down. So their cost to support their customers has dropped. I think it's about 24-25%. They're able to charge about 23-24% more on their subscription basis. So it's a more profitable contract for them, and the customers are happy because they have less downtime. And the challenge with that, it's a dynamic shift from what a lot of businesses are doing today, especially, being in the manufacturing space. We've got customers that are 70, 80, 90 years in business. Getting them to adopt new models like that is not an easy endeavor to go upon, but having the tools to be able to support a model like that, to make sure that when you offer it, you can actually deliver on it and get the profitability out of it. It's a challenge, but we're seeing more and more companies do it. But when you look at new companies in the market out there, everyone's going to a subscription model just for that purpose. Be able to, it's predictive revenue, it's more profitable revenue. You can track things a lot quicker, but having the tools behind it to support that with the AI and the machine learning, so you can get predictive whenever things, you show up and fix the elevator before it breaks.
Yeah,
Scott, I was just going to supplement your conversation with, we agree that Rolls-Royce is formidable in its approach to servitization. Shameless plug, but Jörn Lindstad, the Senior Vice President of Global Customer Service, was just appointed to our industry advisory board. Nice. So really, really pleased to have Jörn in the community now. Back to you, Gerardo.
Yeah, and I love the case study, first of all, because it shows that it can be done, right? And one of the things you said as you were explaining that is, it's typically not easy to take these concepts and the conversation that we've had for 10 plus years of let's do outcome-based services. A lot of organizations don't even dare to get started, or they fail along the journey. What are those things that that create resistance? Where do these efforts fall apart? Now that we talked about the fact that it can be done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, change is hard. That's the biggest thing, especially when you've been doing something for so long. That's a trap a lot of prospects get into when we're talking to them. It's like we think we do it really, really well. We just want to do it in a new system and try to do the exact same thing, as opposed to taking advantage of new capabilities that didn't exist 10, 12, 15 years ago when you implemented these things.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other area where these projects go off the rails is they don't engage, their technicians in this. They're the tip of the spear. They're the ones that are out there. And when you look at the service models, it's the most expensive thing they have, the human resources component of it. And they do not bring them into it early enough to get their feedback, their input, the why they're doing things. What's in it for me? I'm changing everything I do. I've got to go add more, more data points to your thing. How does that benefit me? It tends to be a little bit big brotherish sometimes, of if they don't know what the benefit for them is on these things. And then where I also see some of the failures, when you don't have commitment at the top down from the change management, of just really, letting people know the reasons why you're doing these things and how it affects the customers, how it's going to benefit the technicians, how it's going to drive the profitability, things like that. I think if they feel like they're empowered and part of the process, your chance of success is significantly higher.
Scott, you made some really interesting points there, one of which was on the change management side of things. And we featured a couple guests on this podcast that talked about best approaches to change management, becoming an architect of change, and how it's important that leadership is present for the demolition and the rebuild, the tear down and the rebuild. The importance of going up and down the work stream, from leadership down, so a top down, bottom up approach in terms of involvement. And one of the things, and that kind of links to my other comment here, referencing the data, the early returns from the Voice of the Field Service Engineer survey this year, we're seeing a deterioration, if you will, of the agreement with the notion that management in their company is making it easy for them to find the necessary information to be effective in their job. Mm-hmm. So 2023, we saw 70% report that they agree with that statement. This year so far, it's early returns, right about the cutoff was about 650 respondents. We saw that dip to 61%. Now that needle could move, right? As we scale, we typically get 3,000 plus engineers, but the signals right now are that there's a deterioration of their agreement with the notion that information is accessible and easily accessible. And we're seeing a double click on how much of an issue the time spent finding information is. Yeah. Year over year, it's gone up from 24 to 38%, a 14-point swing in the wrong direction, where more engineers agree that it's a top dislike amongst their day-to-day.
Yeah, I don't doubt those metrics, and they're probably worse than you're talking about, because the whole proliferation of access to data. I mean, there's just so much data out there. You have access to it. Is it the right data? How long do I have to sift through it to get to the right data? It just makes their jobs harder if you're not surfacing up the right components or the right fix or the right whatever. It's just an outcome or a symptom of, I think, all the capturing of the data that we've been doing for the past 10 years and getting rid of the bad stuff. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it ends up being a very similar approach to how technical debt is perceived, right? That shift from not necessarily more data, but the right data. Because to put a bit of a positive swing on the conversation, along with the gaps that the field is reporting, we're also seeing a high willingness to adopt the right technologies and the right levers. One of the questions we have is, what are the capabilities that you don't have today, but that you believe would add a lot of value? And 4 out of the top 5 answers are related to advanced technologies. It's AI for troubleshooting. It's having data about the assets telemetry. It's live video. It's all AR, VR type capabilities. So there's not a fear of adopting change and adopting innovation in the field, as long as that change is managed correctly. And I think that signals that there is a real opportunity to get things done.
Yeah, we definitely see it as well. I mean, some projects, like some of the AR stuff, some of the remote capabilities, the cool thing about them is you can spin up pilots really quickly and see value very quickly from that aspect of it. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. You know, in these big organizations, you can work with a small business unit in there and spin up a 15, 20 person pilot and see value, but you can't get the attention at the top of the food chain in the organization to get them to try to adopt it across, because everyone has different objectives and different KPIs that they're looking at. So you get a lot of noise from that side of it. But to your point, there is some really cool stuff out there that moves the needle. But the challenge is there's a lot of noise out there as well, because, you know, a lot of the big guys have tried to make some of this stuff commodity based. You know, it's a hubcap. Every hubcap is the same. Just put one on, and they're not all created equally.
Yeah, and doing a bit of an audible here, but another thing that we're learning this year, and this was a new question that we incorporated into the survey, was how different are the change in demands that the field is perceiving versus their capabilities. And we were tracking customer expectations, management expectations, and over 80% of the respondents say, yes, this has changed since I started in the career. The new part is how much has training capabilities improved? How much has the ability to access data quickly improved? And all these levers, all these results that we should expect from the technology. And out of these levers, the one that has the highest change affirmation is still below 30%. So when we hear that much more is expected of me, and 8 out of 10 are saying this, but only 3 out of 10 at best say that the levers have changed, that creates a disconnect. And the question that I have around that is, we've started talking about how change is hard. Is there anything different about AI within the change management spectrum that we should consider and maybe take advantage of in order to close this gap?
Yeah, it's a challenge for sure. When you look at a lot of these companies and the human capital piece of it is obviously the biggest thing, and it's somewhat generational too. I mean, the younger crowd, you know, tend to not be quite as loyal as the 30-year tech that's, you know, working for the cable company. Then, you know, he's not really, doesn't have an appetite to learn new technology because he sees retirement in 5 years. The younger crowd wants everything to be, you know, super simple, like their iPhone. So it's click, click. You know, from a training perspective, they don't want to go to class and learn this stuff or spend hours and hours learning new technology. The AI piece of it is another overlay from the generative side of it, to be able to hopefully lay in things like from the co-pilot side, when you're in your phone, to be able to direct you to, you know, the thing, to make that easier. The self-service, the more not the business user, but more of the, you know, the home user type capabilities from the system. But yeah, AI is we're tip of the iceberg from my perspective on some of this, of how we can benefit on the training side of it. We can leverage some of those capabilities around seeing where they're clicking in the applications to direct them to training that's more specific to them to make their jobs easier. But it's wading through all the needles in the stack of needles to get them to the right content.
This is a slippery slope, and you got to really be careful about going back to your comment about involvement of the frontline and the change management and the innovation and the transformation. One of the signals that we constantly look at as part of the voice of the field service engineer is to what degree are they committed to the career? We always ask that question. And this year, early returns, once again, 3 out of 10 are hard no, signaling that they will not be for the duration of their career a field service engineer. And another 28% didn't know. They weren't sure. And then when you look at when, it's nearly 50% in the next 3 years are going to be departing. So from those hard no's. And so, you know, making the job and a life easier, but involving them is a big part of this.
Mm-hmm.
Involving them in the change management, so it doesn't feel like another flavor of the month technology rollout, that they're part of the equation, their voice is heard. And we asked them, Gerardo was talking about their belief of technology helping them in their job. AI so far, pretty positive. 58% response on AI was the cutoff at 650 respondents. 58% were positive to AI, but there's still 14% that are negative. And we actually go deeper, and we ask them, do you feel technology will replace you? Are you unsure if it will? Or do you believe that technology is just here to help aid you? And 16% felt that tech would replace them. 17% were unsure. If you combine that, that's 1/3 of your demographic that is not all that relationship fuzzy wuzzies that they need with the technology investments that leadership is making. So there's a gap that needs to be kind of closed here, so that adoption rates are increased and there's betterment from that point of view. So just wanted to bring some of that data here just to share that.
Yeah, that definitely jives what we hear. It's like, and I think that's why it's critically important why you engage and bring them as part of the process. So you're not looking to, they get the perception that you're just looking to replace me. From a field service perspective, it's near impossible to replace your field service, because you can't remotely send a robot out to drive up to a customer to do these things. So if you get them as part of the engagement where they've got some empowerment, they feel like they're part of the process, they've got their input heard, I think you can increase some of those. But I definitely see and hear that out there, depending on what the role is, for sure.
And one of the things that I believe helps in clarifying and get AI and getting people on board is getting into the nuance, getting into the details. And for a quick piece of trivia, I'm originally from Mexico, and it's interesting that sometimes people talk about Latin America as a single block, right? And the funniest example is perhaps with language, and people will learn Spanish from somebody from Mexico, and then they go to Colombia and nobody understands them, and they go through all these expressions from Argentina, and they're like, what have I been studying all this time? And there's a lot of differences there, right? So something similar happens with AI. We run the risk of falling into that trap, that we talk about AI as this big block, and in reality, there's a whole set of applications, of possibilities, of use cases that AI can be a good fit for, and the way that we think about implementing it is going to change depending on that. So as we see that there's definitely a push for investment, the top technology that service leaders were planning to deep dive on in 2024 was AI, which was not a surprise, but the jump from the previous year went from 32% to 62%. So that's pretty significant. And the question is, with all this nuance and from your observations, do you feel like the AI investments are being properly targeted, or are they perhaps, are we being too narrow in our approach, and there's use cases that are being underutilized?
Yeah, it's, again, I think it's organization by organization. I think, we're only typically targeting kind of the large end of the enterprise, like 300 million and above is kind of our target market from that aspect of it. And the vast majority of our clients do have AI budget. Again, it's a generalized budget. What does that mean? AI is a very big topic, and then figuring out kind of where your KPIs and what you as a business are trying to achieve from an outcome perspective. But some of the companies are very mature with it. We're working with a really large telecommunications provider. They are looking to be bleeding edge with it. We talked to some tier 2 telecommunications companies that are just trying to wait to see what the big guys do and then follow suit, because they don't want to make an investment that's throwaway, because again, there's so much noise out there in the space around AI. I don't think there's a software company on the planet that doesn't have an AI deck that they're showing companies of how they're driving value with AI. Mm-hmm. So I think that there's a maturity curve level. I think some are on the cutting edge of it, and I think the ones that are on the cutting edge are going to reap significant rewards, because once they get it right, they're going to have such a head start over their competitors. I think the laggards in it are going to struggle big time, because I think they're going to miss the boat on some of these things. So I think every company should be making these investments. It's just about how you do it prudently.
And if I can double click on that, because as you said, there's a lot of large organizations that you're working with. The Rolls-Royce example was a great one about thinking differently about where AI can be applied, by getting over a hurdle that before was very, very hard to overcome. So have you come across other implementations that have perhaps surprised you, the ones that you would call most creative? If I know I'm putting you on the spot here a little bit, but anything that comes to mind on that?
So we've got a large security customer, home security system, that's done some unique things. I think they kind of tend to be on the cutting edge of driving innovation and how they go to market. A couple of things they're doing. I mean, from an automation perspective, now they're doing almost 94% order automation without touching an order at all, and a lot of that is leveraging the AI and the machine learning. So the system's going to automatically find the right tech, the right thing. But again, it took a little bit of a change in mindset of how they've done things in the past. They're also now starting to incorporate a lot of the remote assist capabilities and in nuanced ways that I've never seen before, where they're scheduling remote appointments for techs at their house in an urban area, so they can do them between 8 and 9:30 in the morning, where they'll do 3 or 4 jobs at home before they get on the road and sit in traffic for 45 minutes. So again, thinking a little bit outside the box when doing some of these things. They're deferring, I think, almost 2,000 truck rolls a month now for doing remote assist jobs for a very inexpensive solution that drives incredible value. It increases the CSAT, increases the customer base, and it reduces their cost dramatically. And it also, their technicians are happier too, because they're not sitting on the I-9 for 40 minutes going 3 miles an hour.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And one of the things I like there is the connection of the dots, right? A gap that we often see in KPIs and in implementations is we remain in the siloed approach. We talk about the big picture, but then when it comes to the operational level, it's hard to move beyond that. So the more organizations are at the front end of the design, explicitly thinking about how these KPIs are going to connect to each other, from the very tactical level to the strategic North Star that they're after. It's easier to make the business case. It's easier to demonstrate the change to the people that are driving it, and there's less competing interests. So I would call that out as a necessary condition to think differently about KPIs. And the corollary to that is, there was a recent report in MIT Sloan, I've talked about it before, that organizations with a high ROI from their AI initiatives are 10 times more likely to change the KPIs that they're using to measure the business, because they discover new things, because they realize, oh, well, I was missing a connection point between these two different organizations that can be the bridge and can tell me whether I'm on the right track or not. And also seeing a shift in leading versus lagging indicators. Very, very gradual, very slow, or slower than we would like to, but I see that it's happening. And you had a comment there, I think, Scott.
Yeah, the other thing I think that leads to successful projects is really truly embrace a partnership approach. And at the enterprise level, everyone talks partnership, But at the end of the day, a lot of the companies look at it as a vendor software relationship. It's not a partnership relationship. And if you really want to be successful, is bring in your partner company under the table, understand exactly what your objectives are, because they don't know where you're going with your roadmap down to the detail, but you can influence that. But there's a lot of capabilities in these platforms. If you truly bring the software vendor in to understand what your objectives are, we can both be successful with that. And then it's a win-win all the way around.
Yeah. So let's talk about that bringing in the vendor process. So one of the once organizations decide to invest, another interesting statistic is that 80% of the companies claim that they have an ideation incubation of new ventures, but only 16% of them were able to successfully scale them. So that's 80% failure rate, and most statistics will be around that 70-80% range. The typical approach is starting with a pilot and then demonstrating value out of that, making a decision. In the environment that you're in with large organizations, what's your take on that? What's your recommendation on how to get started?
Yeah, I cringe when I hear the word pilot at enterprise, because they typically don't have budget, and it's throwaway money. If it's successful, it's successful. If it's not, it's not. Like when you're doing service, service is hard. I mean, these are some of the most complex you're going to encounter. I mean, you're tying into systems from customer support, CRM, ERP, finance, order orchestration. I mean, they're just really, really complex projects. And to do a pilot, to do it right, you almost have to do a full implementation, because how are you going to see the value out of it unless you've done that full implementation? And companies don't want to do that because these are not small projects. I mean, some of it is, I think there's got to be some trust and learning, who you want to partner with. Find companies that you truly do trust and want to build a long-term relationship with. And then you can build some of those things out. But pilots, they always make me cringe because they rarely are successful. And when companies look at things like, field service, enterprise asset management, we're still stuck in, the traditional RFP model. And here's our, 75-page questionnaire, and we're going to score everybody on it. And I guarantee 95% of those come back with, yep, we can do everything out of the box. And there's better ways to look at these and evaluate these things. And there's only a certain amount of people that can do them. Everybody can't do them at scale. Figure out who you want to partner with, look at who their references are, who their customers are, and then partner with them. I mean, it's a different way to look at it for sure, but the ones that are successful do that.
Yeah. And in that, because I want to address one of the typical pushback that you would hear, which is, well, that involves a lot of implementation risks, and we talked about technical debt earlier, which goes back. I don't want one more thing, especially if it's big one. What is the data? What is the intelligence that can be developed early on in order to help overcome these fears?
Mm-hmm. And it goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning. You can set these things up where you're not boiling the ocean. You can do simple use cases that show the movement of the needle very quickly. Because again, when you're talking at scale, you got to move a small basis points to equate to millions of dollars. Get people excited about it, then people will invest. They'll come back to the table and then add additional use cases. The cool thing about inService, there's a million different levers, all these KPIs, and they're not created equal. If we want to increase CSAT, well, we're going to probably pay more for overtime because we're letting more people work longer to make sure our customers are happy. But it's all about picking that partner, picking that vendor that's going to work with you to drive that, and figure out what those low-hanging fruits are, get some quick wins, and then grow, and then see what the art of the possible is, because the art of the possible is pretty immense.
Yeah, Scott, I was just going to say the think big, start small concept can still be deployed even when thinking adversely to a pilot methodology, right? You can still think big and start small in group success-oriented deployment methodologies, whether it's by region, by product, or by some other part of divisional breakup of the business, right? You can start incrementally, get a win, get some momentum in that change management process. We're hearing a lot of that, quite honestly, across our members.
Yeah, and along this process, sometimes it's the lessons learned and the ability to move beyond the scars from the past, if you will. Would you, as we're approaching the end of the session, would you maybe have an example of a customer you've engaged, and you don't need to name them necessarily, where they had gone through some of these scars, and whether changing leadership, you coming in as a partner, led to a different approach? And what I would like to understand, if you have such a story, is what had they done originally, and what did you do that was different and that led to a different outcome?
Yeah. So we've got a couple projects where, as we mentioned, this stuff is hard. It's really, really complex. And, we're not a sales force on our side. So there's not 10,000 developers out there that know our platform, and you can go out there and find somebody in 5 minutes to figure out who's going to come in and work for us as a subcontractor. So we've had a couple of large projects where customers have tried to self-deploy on some of this stuff, which I always cringe on that. We're a partner-led organization, but we've got a little bit of a different approach where we take a three-pronged approach where when we sign contracts with customers, part of the implementation, whether they use a system integrator or they work with us in our professional services, we've got a team that's engaged from the very beginning to ensure that success, where they kind of did not want to go down that path. So tried to self-implement and spun their wheels for 9, 10, 12 months, come back and ask for help. And now we're finally engaged with them and getting them on the right track to get fast deployment. But, they feel like they've gone down a wrong path, and it's the product. And it's not the product, because we get lots of customers using the product. Just, you don't know what you don't know getting into it. Engage tightly with your vendor companies to understand who the right partners are. Lean on them when you can, get that quick time to value so that you can get some additional budget to grow and do additional things with the platforms.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And to share another quick quote from my days in academia, one professor would say, that's the very good answer to the wrong question. And sometimes that's what happens when we blame the technology. It's not that it was the technology or the person what was wrong. It was just a disconnect between the answer and the question. This has been it's been so many nuggets in such a short amount of time. John, I don't know if before we get into the last couple of questions, if you have any additional insights that you'd like to share, or should we move forward?
Just a couple things on the change management side, just referencing back the previous podcasts and some of the research we've conducted around change management. We've heard a couple of key tenets that we've seen as successful deployment methodologies in terms of high adoption rates post-deployment or post-change. And some of those tenets include finding the champions of change, understanding the change, what are we solving for, personalizing the change, involving your A players, not your B players. I think that's a big critical one. And over communication, right? Obviously, the over communication in terms of what is the rationale for change? Why are we doing this? What are we solving? And having a culture of involvement and participation, up and down the leadership ranks, if you will. So those are some of the things that we call out from some of the discussions we've had. And just wanted to kind of build behind the discussion with some of those as a revisit. So Back to you, Gerardo.
Yeah. So a word of caution that I would add there is, within all the possibilities that we have right now with AI, I also believe that there's a relatively short window that we have to demonstrate those values. And because of the complexity involved, because of the investments that need to come into play, when that does not materialize and it stays at the 20,000 foot level, teams can become cynical about it. And we have to be cognizant of that, and we need to proactively address those situations. So just a word of advice, if anything. Scott, I insist you've shared so much. Are there any other gotcha moments that we perhaps haven't covered that you'd like to share with the community before we wrap up?
No, I think the key takeaway from my perspective and being in the space for so long, all these solutions are not created equal. Just make sure you do your due diligence as you're looking at these things. Look at scale. If you've got a large workforce, again, that's one of the areas where we differentiate immensely, is at scale, to be able to deliver these solutions at scale with high volume. But yeah, it's there's some really cool stuff out there, and what's awesome about this space is it impacts so many different KPIs. The ROIs can be absolutely insane when you look at all the different areas where you can positively or negatively affect the KPI to drive value.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Scott, we're looking forward to see you in Chicago, September 9th through the 11th at the symposium. The IFS team will be there. We have a really great agenda. It's going to be my first year at the event, and it's overwhelming to look at all the service leaders that are going to be main stage, the different topics, this connection of the dots from the technology, intelligence, and technology side of the house, people and organization. It's a central theme within these human connected digital journeys, and then drawing that connection between the technical and functional roadmaps to overcome or address the change management side of the house. How do we incorporate what we know about behavioral elements, not to leverage them to help us accelerate the possibilities that data, technology, and processes bring to us. So it's going to be a very exciting 3 days, an opportunity to expand on the conversation that we've had today with Scott. And before we wrap up, Scott,
Gerardo,
yes.
actually, we did have one question come in from our listening and now participating audience. So I think we have time. And Scott said he was willing. So, and I think you've touched upon some of these elements throughout the course of the discussion. He said David Swift indicated he loves the partnership focus. Who are your favorite folks to partner with within the field service organization to drive value with AI? So as you think about the role-based involvement, can you talk a little bit about whom you're commonly engaging?
Yeah, so great question, David. Thank you. Appreciate it. So a lot of times when we're talking to the field service side, we're talking more to the deployment side of the house for scheduling the resources going out there. But it's really the tip of the spear where AI drives a ton of value in the call center. So a lot of times we can get leveraging the AI capabilities to surface up the right fix right away. Being able to leverage some of the augmented reality or the virtual reality pieces to prevent a truck roll from even going out. That's an area where there's huge value. So if you can save, I think the average, last I saw, the average truck roll was about $175 per truck just to send them out there to diagnose an issue. You can stop 10 or 12 of those a week. That adds up very quickly, and that's just all AI capabilities of tying back into your data lakes, pulling the right the right fixes up, looking at what the technicians have done in the field when they're diagnosing the issues, so that it's fixing things quickly from a tier 1 call center rep.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for spotting that, John. A very relevant question, David. I'm glad you brought that up and that we saw it in time. Going back to the wrap up, Scott, thank you again. But before we let you go, do you mind sharing something perhaps outside of your day job, something on the personal side that you're looking forward to in the near term, perhaps, that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, so I mentioned that I got 2 boys at home that are juniors and seniors in college. We have a couple of dogs, rescue pit bulls. For those that are familiar with pit bulls, they're I think personally the greatest dogs in the world. Get a bad reputation, but we do a lot of that with the rescues and the animal society. So we take care of those dogs a lot, and we foster dogs quite a bit. So that's something we do and take a personal approach to.
So you're already getting a bravo in the comments, and I'll second.
Yes, doing God's work, Scott. Absolutely, I love it. We are not
And-
worthy of dogs.
No, you're 100%. I could not agree more.
Very good. So with that in mind, John, you're the expert here. Do you mind walking us through where can people find the podcast? Where is it going to be available?
Happily. Yeah. First and foremost, I want to thank you, Scott, for your contributions today. It was a really, really chock full of good resources for our listening audience. Thank you very much to you and IFS. We really appreciate the partnership. For our listening audience, if you'd like to access today's podcast, you can get it on our website. You can get it on LinkedIn. You can get it on whatever podcast you subscribe to in an audio format. If you'd like to revisit the video format, you'd have to grab this here at LinkedIn. But with that, we thank you for joining us, and we will see you in a couple weeks on our next segment. And Scott, thank you once again for your contributions today. A really interesting dialogue. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, guys. You do great work for the industry, so I appreciate your support.
Thank you.
Cheers. Have a great day. Take care.